Dear God, we thank you in this moment for this magnificent day through which we have lived. The beauty about us has been incredible. I pray we will not take that for granted. And you who created the beauty of this day, would you now in your infinite grace create beauty within each one of us, as in these moments our trust in you is deepened, our sense of your wonder is enhanced, and may we come with greater absoluteness to be able to rest our lives and those we love in the hands of your great mercy. We thank you for this place and for this hour. Into your hands we give ourselves, through Christ our Lord. Amen. Our focus for this fall series is the last 27 chapters of the Old Testament classic Isaiah. It's the story, as I've been saying now for the Wednesday nights that we've met, it's the story about some people that had an extraordinary tragedy to come into their lives, and what it was that they learned in that deep, dark valley of darkness. I'll not spend a lot of time reiterating the storyline, simply to say that a group of people whose ancestors had lived in Palestine for almost 1,000 years suddenly found the unthinkable happening, and that is some barbarians from the east and from the north, Babylonians under a very cruel leader named Nebuchadnezzar, swept over the city that they had felt like was promised them by God, a city that was built by their legendary King David. They had honestly felt that because they were the chosen people of God and Palestine was the promised land, that nothing could possibly ever happen to them. And lo and behold, in 598 BC, the unthinkable occurred. This army overran Jerusalem. 25,000 of the brightest and the best were captured and taken into captivity 600 miles to the east. And only 12 years later, when those who were left in Jerusalem very foolishly rebelled against the Babylonian army, there was an explosion of destructiveness. And this time they leveled the city. They took the temple that Solomon had built, stone upon stone, until there was nothing left, the great palace of David. And the rest of the inhabitants that had survived and were able were also taken into exile. And so what had been, they thought, a place that they would live forever, protected by God because they were chosen people, was absolutely devastated. And for 60 years, people who had this kind of crisis lived over in a place where they weren't tortured like a concentration camp during World War II, but they were made slaves. They did have to work for the Babylonians. They were in a place where the language was unintelligible. The topography was flat and monotonous. Everything about the life into which they were thrust was utterly different than what they had known. And that's why I've chosen to call this study, When the Bottom Drops Out, What Then? Because it is a story about crises that come along. This one, I admit, overly dramatic. But sometimes the plates of the earth shift underneath us. The securities that we have known disappear. Suddenly the way it is radically different and worse than the way it was. And that's the kind of storyline that we're working with. What was learned when the bottom dropped out? I have been trying to suggest that after 60 years of living in this horrible exile, in about 540 BC, an unnamed prophet was raised up out of these exiled people who began to say, God has not forgotten us. In spite of all the ways that we have rejected God, God has not rejected us. He saw in the changing pageant of international politics that there was hope on the way, because a Persian leader by the name of Cyrus rose up in about 1550 and began to make his move across the northern ridge of Babylon. And in 538, he did, in fact, capture Babylon. Did to Babylon the same thing Babylon had done to Jerusalem. But he was a very different kind of leader, more, I said, like David than anybody else in 500 years. And as this prophet predicted, Cyrus said to the Hebrews who were still surviving and who were still in Babylon, I free you and I release you to go back and rebuild your city and return to your homeland. And so suddenly, after 60 years of living with terrible disappointment, here someone comes and begins to speak a hopeful word. Started out by saying, comfort ye, my people. Speak home to the hearts of Israel. Tell them that they are not forgotten. There is still a future in spite of the past. And what God began to do through Cyrus was an event as gracious as the event of creation itself, when God called all things out of nothing into being, and also an event as gracious as anyone's birth into this world, something we could not have made happen, something we do not deserve. Once again, God was manifesting the incredible grace that lies at the very heart of reality. And my great hope for this series is that it will give you a sense of resource when you find yourself up against it. That I would like to identify an understanding of the Holy One that will stand you in good stead when it seems like that everything that you've depended on has suddenly collapsed around you. Because this is not just a story about something that happened long ago. It's a story that reveals to us the nature of the God who is as present to us today as he was to those people that lived back then. And so tonight I would like for us to continue our exploration into this story that at bottom reveals the very nature of God. I'd like for us to look at a single term, the righteousness of God. And what I'd like to say is that the way this word is used in the first 39 chapters of Isaiah, and the way it's used in the last 27 chapters, is yet another piece of evidence that the material that we're working with this time was written by a different person at a different time and for a different purpose than the first 39 chapters of Isaiah. Isaiah himself lived from 740 to 700 BC. And the set of events that we're going to be talking about in the exile and eventually the return, they happened a good 150 years later. Cyrus himself is mentioned. There's no way that Isaiah in his 8th century time could have known about that. Many of the descriptions of the situation in this last part of Isaiah describe what they were up against in exile. And so what must have happened is that after the ministry of Isaiah the prophet, in which he had predicted that if they continued to live as unlovingly as they were living, that they were going to collapse, that someone, and we don't know who it was, there have been some suggestions that the author of this last 27 chapters was a female, and this is entirely possible because the insights certainly do show that kind of sensitivity. But some unnamed prophet in the middle of the 6th century BC was inspired to say this word of hope. And so the word righteous is used in these chapters in a very different way than it's used in the first 39 chapters. And I think that together, the way Isaiah used them in the original teachings, and then the way that this unnamed prophet takes the same word and gives it a different nuance, that together, it's kind of like bifocals, together it gives us the clearest image we have into the nature of the Holy One until for us humans and for our salvation, that one dared to come and incarnate himself in human form and show to us his likeness in the face of Jesus of Nazareth. I believe the second part of Isaiah is closer to the New Testament in its understanding of God than any other part of the Old Testament. So I want us to look tonight at this term, the righteousness of God, and try to see through it like a telescope into the farthest reaches of the truth about this Holy One in whose hands we live our lives. Now the term righteousness comes from the Hebrew root tzedek, or the Latin root rectus, and its most basic meaning was straight. It's really a physical term in its most primitive usage. It stands for something that is sound, something that is correct, something that is true to the ideal or to the norm. In fact, I guess one of the best ways of giving a contemporary definition to it would be when you say something is all right, or when you say something is right, you're talking about what lies behind this particular word. Andrew Greeley speaks of the incredible all-rightness of the way it is. In the book of Genesis, God looks on the world as he first made it and said, it is good, it is good, it is very, very good. Now that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. But now in these two parts of this book with the same name, the word righteousness is used by the prophet Isaiah largely as a noun. And by that I mean he uses the term to describe the design by which God created the world. He uses it as a way of saying, here is how God meant for us to live in God's kind of world. And therefore it is a description of life as God gave it to us and God means for us to live it. In the second Isaiah, as it's sometimes called, chapters 40 to 66, the same word is used as an active verb. And this time, though it's not in contradiction to God's design of creation, this time he uses it to describe God's power to set things right, to heal, to repair, and to restore. And so what you have here is a dual insight into the nature of God. God is on the one hand the maker, the source behind everything that is, and God is also the mender, also willing to take what we have done to his beautiful creation, which is contrary to his purpose, take the mess that we have made of this creation that was given to us as a gift, and God's ingenious power to mend, to heal, to restore. I read this week that God is like a dressmaker who knows how to make adjustments, alterations. That God is not unwilling, once we have sinned against him, to be willing to do something to help repair and to help mend. And so the two ways the word is used, as a noun to describe God's design of creation, we get an insight into God's wisdom in the verbal form of righteousness. We get an insight into God's mercy, God's tenacity, God's willingness not to turn away from us when we turn away from him, but to continue to work with us, to bring us back into that realm of love that is his essence and is the ideal. First of all, I want to say just a few things about the way Isaiah chapter 1 to 39 uses righteousness as a noun. What he does is to strike the note that you find all throughout Holy Scripture, and that is, in the final analysis, Isaiah is saying, love is the final law of reality. We are meant to live together with each other in loving ways because we were called into being by love, and our purpose for being here is to learn to love and to learn to live our lives lovingly. I've said so many times in my 10 years here, back in that time before time, in that beginningless beginning, when there was nothing but this mystery that is life, has life, this mystery that we call God, this incredibly momentous thing must have occurred when this mystery of Godness said, the wonder of my aliveness is too good to keep to myself. I want others to taste its ecstasy. I want others to know the wonder of being and having and doing. I want others to know some of the joy that I know in simply being what I am. And so it was out of that desire to share, out of deep generosity, that the Holy One decided to become the generous one. And that's how creation came into existence. We are here not because God had some emptiness in God that God had to fulfill, but we're here because there was a fullness in God that God wanted to share. God created not to get something for God's self, but to give something of God's self, which is a way of saying that we come into this world from love, and we are created to love. That is our purpose for being here. Love is the one required course in all the curriculum of living. This is the one thing that explains our origin and our destiny. And so that's the way that Isaiah uses the term righteousness. He says that we live in the world the way God wants us to live in it when we are loving to each other. Now, functionally speaking, this means that when we use some of our strength and power, the impact that this makes on everybody that is touched by it is an enriching, a nurturing, and a blessing impact. Love is a way of enriching the beloved. Love is a way of giving in a way that enhances and enriches. And love, as you know, is the absolute fulfillment of the law. James says that every one of the 10 Commandments that are placed in negative form are really ways that you wouldn't have to say to people if love were the guiding reality. You shall not kill, you shall not steal, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not bear false witness, you shall not covet. Now, a loving person is not going to have to be told not to do any of those things, because it is the functional essence of love to want to bless everyone that love touches. Now, it follows in Isaiah's use of this that if love is the law of reality, then all sins, when it comes right down to it, are sins against love. That is, anytime we don't live lovingly, anytime our actions toward each other are destructive or indifferent, every time we don't let love be the guiding principle, then we're going against the basic grain of reality. We're going against the basic law of love. And I would say tonight that the law of love spiritually is just as real and just as powerful as the law of gravity is physically. Now, you know as well as I do that you and I as creatures don't have the power to break the law of gravity. If we deal with it carelessly, then the law of gravity has ways of breaking us. We don't break the laws of God. The laws of God break us. And if love is the law of reality, which is righteousness as a noun, then it follows that every breach of lovingness, all sins are sins against love, and that if people choose to live that way, then they're going to create chaos, they're going to create destructiveness. God starts with nothing and moves through chaos to form and beauty. Evil, unlovingness, takes form and beauty and pushes it back into chaos, disrupts it, fragments it, and if pushed far enough, goes back into the nothingness. So what Isaiah says in the first 39 chapters are, if you don't realize that love is the law of reality, if you relate to each other indifferently, if you don't care what happens to each other, or if you relate to each other abusively or exploitively, you are going to unmake creation as it was designed of God, and that is going to bring great pain on those you act unlovingly on, and it's going to bring great pain upon you. And so he began to warn the Hebrews that if they did not recognize the law of love as God intended for them to, that life as they knew it was going to disintegrate. Now, they had fallen into the magic notion that because they were God's chosen people, and because Israel or Palestine was the promised land, that nothing could happen to them. They had this fantasy that they were God's favorites, that they didn't have to obey the laws of reality because they were somehow exempt. And so when the unthinkable happened, when the terrible, terrible invasion of the Babylonians swept away life as they had known it, Isaiah was standing there to say, I told you that if you break the laws of love, then the laws of love are going to break you. I told you that chaos is what always follows the sin against the law of love, which is always the ultimate sin. And so the explanation for why this terrible tragedy came upon them, the explanation was not that God was indifferent or that God was somehow capricious. The answer lay in their own behavior. And one of the things that they learned in that long 60 years in exile, as they had to live into how they had been, and what Isaiah had said to them, and how they had ignored it, and how they had allowed themselves to become indifferent in a very, very hostile culture, A few people got hold of all the sources of wealth and wasted it on themselves in utterly useless luxury, whereas the great host of the Hebrews were left without enough to hardly keep themselves going. And they got to the place that they were absolutely impoverished. So when the Babylonians came, the pampered rich were not able to defend themselves, and the impoverished poor had no reason to defend themselves because they had no stake. The pattern of unlovingness absolutely disintegrated the social cohesion of that society. And as I've said here on other Wednesday nights, that same principle holds true today. We cannot live together unlovingly and expect to survive. The more we live unlovingly, the more we're breaking the laws of reality, and the end of that is always destruction and always the return of chaos. So righteousness as a noun says to us that God really knew what God was doing when he put the world together as he did. And the reason love is the basic law of reality is because God is love. Creation is the expression of the way God really is, and we don't have any say-so about that. You and I are not free to deal with the law of love with impunity and not suffer from it. The wages of sin is death. That's always the way it is, and it's not because God is cruel. It's not because God is capricious, because God wanted us to share God's kind of life and joy, and God is love. Then living lovingly is the way to experience what God wanted us to experience. Living unlovingly is unmaking creation. It is turning back the process. Remember how Scott Peck said, his little boy said to him one day, that the word evil is the word live spelled backwards. It is the mirror opposite, E-V-I-L-L-I-V-E. That's a very powerful way of saying that evil is the opposite of the intended law. So righteousness as a noun is the design that is absolutely fundamental. You and I are not free to break it unless we know that we're going to have consequences. So that's what the first 39 chapters of Isaiah do with the term righteousness. In the last 27 chapters, however, this unnamed prophet rises up and is given a vision of another aspect of God's righteousness, his correctness, his straightness, the way he conforms to the truth of what he is. Because righteousness, as this unnamed prophet describes it, is a verb. Here, what you see is God not just as the maker of creation and the designer, but here you have God as the mender. I've said many times before that creation came into being because of the generosity of God. And it's astonishing that God wanted to share what God is with others. But a deeper and a more incredible aspect of God's nature is that after we had so tragically taken his generosity and treated it most unlovingly, that God would have mercy enough to stoop over into the mess that we had made of creation, to stoop over and still be concerned for us, still want to do something to try to help us finally to experience the joy that God wanted for us. This is how righteousness as a verb is expressed in mercy, in the capacity to forgive. And the scripture that we're going to be looking at tonight from the 41st chapter is an articulation not of God the Maker, who has designed creation as he intended it, but here is God the mending one, the healing one, the restoring one. And what came to these people after 60 years of feeling like that they had absolutely blown it, feeling like they had forfeited their chance to ever have any kind of good life with God, what came to them after 60 years of that was this voice that broke out of the darkness with the most incredible word. And just as I said 2 weeks ago, where he begins by saying, comfort ye, my people, speak home to the heart of my people, here is what this prophet heard God saying to people who knew in their own experience that they had brought their destruction on themselves. They knew they had made their own bed, and now they were having to lie in it. They knew they had broken the law of love, and because of that they had brought suffering into their lives. And now there comes through this unnamed prophet or prophetess these words, "But you, Israel, my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen, the offspring of Abraham, my friend, you whom I took from the ends of the earth and called from its father's quarters, I am saying to you, you are my servant. I have chosen you and not cast you off. Therefore do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be afraid, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my victorious right hand." The most crucial words here are that sentence, "You are my servant. I have chosen you and not cast you off." Here is where the mercy of God is seen in all of its incredible wonder. It's one thing to, out of generosity, give something to another. It's a very different thing when that person has abused your gift and trampled on your generosity. To have enough love left in your heart and enough hope left for the people that would do that, to say, "I am not going to give up on you, even though you have turned away from me." One of the parallels to this part of Isaiah is that incredible story that Jesus told about the father who had two sons, and the prodigal, the younger son, comes in and shows absolutely no concern whatsoever for the father. Says, in effect, "I wish you were dead. I only want what you've got." Takes it and goes to the far country, and there he wastes what his father had given to him. It was a terrible, terrible abuse of the father's love. But there, in that terrible experience of having abused the law of love, the man learns something about himself. He comes to himself, Jesus says. And he comes back and he says what is so easy to say after we know that we have failed. And that is, "I am sorry. I know that I have sinned against you and against God. And I am no longer worthy to be called your son. I am no longer worthy to have any kind of contact with you at all." And what that lad heard, to his incredible amazement, was that being a son and a daughter has nothing to do with worthiness and has everything to do with that bond of being that comes out of the love of God. Now, I've said to you before that I came into history in 1930 through the love of John Rowan Claypool III and Marietta Buchanan. It was their lives coming together that God used to get me into history. Now, after my birth, I had the freedom to move as far away from my parents as I possibly could. I could violate every value that they treasured. I could turn my back on everything they stood for and have nothing whatsoever to do with them for the rest of my life. But none of that would obliterate the fact that I am the son of John Rowan Claypool and Marietta Buchanan. The bond of being that connects me to my source is not something I created, and therefore it is not something that I can abolish. I can do nothing to actualize it. I can live as far away from it, but I cannot break the bond of being. And here God is saying to these people who had lived when they had the freedom with very little sense of love. They had been indifferent to the poor. They had exploited the widows and the orphans. They had not lived their lives the way God had meant for this world to live. They had unmade creation. And lo and behold, here they hear God saying, "You are my servant. I have chosen you and not cast you off. Therefore, do not fear. I am still with you. Do not be afraid, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my victorious hand." And then what he does is to go on and begin to describe for them how history is going to manifest this incredible mercy of God. Remember, I said that Cyrus was beginning to move on the international scene. It was clear to this prophet that Cyrus was going to be used by God to do something utterly gracious, that is, set these people free, something they could not do for themselves. And he foresaw, and I realize he said this before it actually happened, he foresaw that in Cyrus, God's mercy had raised up yet another instrument of redemption. and that what Cyrus was getting ready to do was to set these people free from the bondage that they were experiencing in Babylon, and he was going to enable them to go back. And so the next words talk about the role reversal that was going to happen. He says, first of all, that the unloving Babylonians are going to experience the same kind of destruction that you experienced, and for the same reason. Here is the law of love once again inserting itself. The Babylonians had been no more loving in the way they treated the Israelites, and the Israelites had been when they had lived with each other. And you can't break the law of love. The law of love is going to break you. And so the same thing that happened to Jerusalem happened to Babylon through the armies of the Persian. But then Cyrus, who was much more lenient and much more merciful, says to all of these groups that had been brought in by Nebuchadnezzar, you're free to go back and rebuild in your own native lands. And so what you have in these next paragraphs are his saying that the people that have treated you so unlovingly are themselves going to experience the consequences of what they've done. Yes, all who are incensed against you shall be ashamed and disgraced. Those who strive against you shall be as nothing and shall perish. You shall seek those who contend with you, but you shall not find them. Those who war against you shall be as nothing at all. For I, the Lord your God, hold your right hand. It is I who say, do not fear. I will help you. God is saying in this shift of international politics, they are going to experience what you've experienced, and maybe someday people will learn that the only way to live well in this world is to live lovingly. But in the meantime, those who have treated you so unlovingly are going to experience the same kind of blade. Then, with a measure of sarcasm, picking up the way that Babylonians had spoken to the Hebrews, do not fear, you worm Jacob, you insect Israel. This is the way the Babylonians had spoken to and had regarded these captive people. They had treated them as if they were worms and insects. If that's the way you treat other human beings, you are absolutely violating the law of God, and there are consequences of that cannot be avoided. And so he talks about, I will help you, your Redeemer is the Holy One of Israel. I will make you a threshing sledge, sharp, new, and having teeth. You shall thresh the mountains and crush them. You shall make the hills like chaff. You shall winnow them, and the wind shall carry them away. The tempest shall scatter them. Then you shall rejoice in the Lord, the Holy One of Israel. In him you shall glory. This, being set free from Babylon, is a grace every bit as towering as the grace of creation. And then he begins to describe how he, the one who is willing to stoop over and work with the messes we have made, he gives a poetic description of how he, the Holy One, is going to provide for them in that long trek back the 600 miles across the desert, back to Jerusalem. Now, this is pure poetry. This is magnificent ways of God saying, I'm going to be able to make something out of nothing. I'm going to be able to give you what you need as you make your way back. When the poor and needy seek water, and there is none, and their tongue is parched with thirst, I, the Lord, will answer them. I will give you what you need to make the journey. I, the Lord God of Israel, will not forsake them. I will open rivers on the bare heights, fountains in the midst of the valleys. I will make the wilderness a pool of water, and the dry land springs of water. I will put in the wilderness the cedar, the acacia, the myrtle, the olive. I will set in the desert the cypress, the plane, the pine together, so that all may see and know, all may consider and understand that the hand of the Lord has done this. The Holy One of Israel has created this. God's original call to Israel was that they would bear witness to the nature of this God whose sole character is to bless. And God's purpose in all of this is to show Israel, and through Israel to show the world, that God's love and God's mercy is everlasting, that there is more power in God to redeem than there is power in us to sin. And though we always live in the design of God's love, and to be redeemed doesn't mean that this has been abrogated. It means that we're given a second chance to learn to live our lives lovingly, even though we have blown our first chance. What you have here is this incredible word of hope that God still has a hand on Israel. He still has a purpose. He still is capable. In spite of all that had been done against his will, he is still capable of bringing something good out of something bad. So the whole purpose of God's dealing with Israel, and in this special experience of the exile, is to help people see God as God really is. It was to make manifest the kind of reality that lies behind all reality. Now, God, as we know God, is the creator of all that is, but as we see in the story, he is also the Redeemer. St. Paul says that God can make the things that are out of the things that are not, and he can make dead things come alive again. Those are the two bifocal features that I want you to hear tonight. And that's why the two uses of this word righteousness are so profound. The righteousness that is God's design is God's power to create the things that are out of the things that are not. And the redemptive power of God is to take even the things that we have killed and bring these back to life. Now, if you will hold both of these together, it will enable you not to experience despair no matter what you find yourself up against. If God can create out of nothing, and if God can redeem even the most tragic and the most sinful situations, then despair really is inappropriate. It is downright presumptuous. It is saying something about a situation that we really have no right to say if this is the deepest truth about God. Fred Bigner says that in the course of Holy Scripture, the worst things are never the last things. When it looks like to us that we have gotten to the absolute end of everything, lo and behold, this kind of power and this kind of mercy still has up its ingenious sleeve things that can be done, and the restoring of this band of exiles back to the land that they had loved and lost. This giving them yet a second chance to re-enter the promised land over against all the rubble of what they had done against the law of love. It was a consummate icon of hope. And tonight I offer you that. I offer you this double vision of God, that God has designed the world out of what God is, and therefore the law of love is always going to be operative, and we all must learn to live in it. That's the only way we'll fulfill our destiny. But no matter how many times we have failed, no matter how many times we have sinned against love, the hold that God has on us is greater than the sins that we have committed. And this incredible tenacity and patience that is willing to stoop over and sort through the pieces and pick up the messes that we have made and then say to us, I still have a future for you in spite of the past. That's what gives us hope when the bottom drops out. I told you about the book that is entitled When the Worst Things That Could Possibly Happen Already Have. Well, that's the way the Hebrews felt. And lo and behold, that was not the end. The worst in their eyes did not turn out to be the last thing. This particular passage that we've worked with tonight has given rise to one of the great hymns of the church, the hymn, How Firm a Foundation. Many years ago, when I was going through a very dark and difficult time, absolute fear one night as to what might happen, it looked like to me that everything was closing in on me. And I couldn't sleep, and I remember tossing and turning on my bed, and it was in the middle of the night. I was living in Jackson, Mississippi at the time. And I remember that about 2 a.m., suddenly the air conditioning came on, and this wave of cool air swept over me as if someone was putting something cool on my brow. And then from somewhere deep inside, nurtured by my wonderful heritage in the church, the third stanza of How Firm a Foundation came to me in the night. Fear not, I am with thee, O be not dismayed, for I am thy God and will still give thee aid. I'll strengthen thee, comfort thee, help thee to stand, upheld by my righteous, omnipotent hand. And the word that simply rang out in the darkness to me that night was the single word, still. Fear not, I am with thee, oh, be not afraid, for I am thy God and will still give thee aid. Now, obviously, those words are drawn from Isaiah. The passage that we've worked with tonight is where that songwriter was inspired to offer that word of hope into the deepest darkness. And so tonight I would say to you, as we face a future that none of us know, not a one of us can anticipate what may happen between tonight and next Wednesday night when we meet back together. We are not in control of everything. We live in a world where all kinds of things can happen. In the face of that genuine uncertainty, let these words of the prophet Isaiah, let these words be your refuge and your strength, your help in whatever time of trouble you may be in or may yet face. For the promise is that though you have turned away from me, I have not turned away from you. Though you have forsaken me, I have not forsaken you. There is a love in me that is bigger than anything that you have ever done, because you are my child. You are my chosen one. And just as there's nothing I can do to break the fact that I'm the son of John Rowan and Rowan Claypool, nothing can ever alter that fact. Nothing can ever alter the fact that you, my friend, are the dear son and the dear daughter of this kind of God. If you're still breathing, it means God still has hope for you. He still wants you to be, and He has the power to make the desert bloom. He has the power to give you water when it seems like that everything is parched. He is the God who can make the things that are out of the things that are not. And He is a God who can even make dead things, situations that we have killed through our folly. He can make even dead things come to life again. And therein is our hope. Fear not, I am with thee, O be not dismayed, for I am thy God, and will still give thee aid. I'll strengthen thee, help thee, cause thee to stand, upheld by my righteous, omnipotent hand. Righteousness is a noun, but thanks be to God,